It's beginning to look a lot like Christmas. That time of year when peace on earth is a common refrain. It's on cards and in windows, and it's a common part of the soundtrack of the season. You've heard it some this morning, haven't you? And then there's, peace on earth and mercy mild. I could start singing just refrains of choruses, couldn't I? But then again, I'm not sure that this time of year feels particularly peaceful. After a few years of sort of reduced Christmas activity, this year it seems that there are plenty of events and Christmas-related gatherings and concerts and shindigs, shall we say, to fill our calendars, which can be fun, it can be great, but it can also be a bit frenzied, a little less than peaceful. But it's not the activity that's the problem, really. There can be this kind of uneasiness in the season that sort of hovers around us, unspoken, when it gets to be just a bit too much, when we spend too much or bake too much or try to do too much. And in our celebrating of Christmas, we wonder, are we catching the meaning? Or are we kind of just missing the mark? Because around us is still all of this hostility, both obvious and hidden, that scars our relationships and our communities. Tension and conflict can plague us as we choose sides among our family members and friends. You know those fights. And we have a culture of estrangement where people regularly just go no contact with each other. And then there are the large and the small acts of violence that are both random and systemic. The violence can be verbal or physical or emotional. We seem to live in a time that Lawrence Wright described as when peace no longer seems necessary or even desirable. Now, you might think I'm overstating it a bit, but at this very moment, right this second, there are more than 100 armed conflicts happening around the globe. More than 100. And, just this past week, on Thursday, on Thanksgiving in the United States, the White House went into lockdown because 2 National Guards were shot and killed in Washington, D.C. National Guards who were there because the perspective was that there was too much violence, so National Guard people should be brought in to stop the violence. Peace on earth feels far off. Nothing like that someday that Isaiah describes when nations will no longer prepare for war. Now, when Isaiah spoke those words, peace was just as far off for his people. In fact, if you read the first chapter of Isaiah, you'll read about this culture of violence that tramples the poor. Around him, Isaiah just saw evidence of bribery and desolation and unfaithfulness. And with the current political setting of Israel and the Middle East, it can be hard for us to imagine the context of Isaiah's world, but let's try. It was not modern-day Israel, even though that was the geographic location. Once upon a time, Israelites were arranged around 12 family tribes. You might remember the 12 tribes of Israel. But by this point, with Isaiah, everything had kind of amalgamated and shifted, so there were 2 kingdoms. And there was the north, which was Israel, and Judah was the south. You'll start to hear those words as we hear the Christmas stories, and you think about, Judah and Israel. Israel north, Judah south. And it was a turbulent time because the Assyrians, further north, were building an empire. And they were heading for Egypt. But first, to take over Egypt, they were going to have to defeat a whole bunch of smaller nations, geographically in places that we now call Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Israel, that kind of location. So the Assyrians are going, and with every small victory, the local population of that area would be deported to various locations to serve as cheap labor for the Assyrian war effort. So, as the Assyrians marched from north to south, taking over everything in their wake, people from the northern kingdom of Israel and the capital of Samaria were attempting to escape by also heading south to Judah and the capital city of Jerusalem. Now, Isaiah, at this point, is working for the monarchy in Jerusalem. So, in addition to the corruption that he describes around him, he is extremely aware of this stream of refugees that is coming into the area and this Assyrian army that is bearing down upon them. So, peace? No. There is no peace. But suddenly and briefly, Isaiah decides to share this vision of peace and prosperity, where people are indeed processing to Jerusalem, but they're not there to escape tyranny, and they're not there to advance their armies, but instead they are going to learn and to grow and to connect with God and God's ways. And this mountain of God is a center not of deceit, not of dishonesty, but is a moral center, a point of orientation for people in the midst of their chaos. And in this vision, the world's people do find within them a capacity to transform the machinery of their destruction into machinery that would sustain and create life, swords into plowshares. So that is all very nice, right? I'd like to live in that world. But when we hear it, we think, well, that's hardly realistic, especially with the enemy at the gate. Wasn't realistic for Isaiah either. So what good was it for Isaiah to talk about peace in a world that was clearly on another path? Indeed, what good is it for us to talk about peace in this world that is so clearly on a different path? Well, Isaiah, I think, had several ideas in mind. Have you ever noticed how much you use different kinds of markers to figure out where you're going? Like most of the time we can confide ourselves to a road or a path, but if there's a storm or fog or snow, something that obscures the pathway, then we need other kinds of landmarks to keep us on track, don't we? And it's no good to follow the clouds because they move. But, a telephone pole or a tree or a sign or a mountain or a lighthouse can help guide our path when we don't know where to go. And I have a sense that for Isaiah, not only could Mount Zion and Jerusalem literally offer that place of orientation, but that he wanted this image, this idea of God's shalom, to be a stabilizing vision that people could hold on to, ground themselves in the midst of the chaos that was surrounding them. A reminder to his people that despite their limited creativity for problem solving and their clear choices for violence, God had not and would not desert them or give up on them. Look at the mountain. Indeed, as far as Isaiah was concerned, God's promise was to stretch those imaginations, to remind them of alternative ways of being in the world, whether or not the world had figured that out yet, to challenge and equip them to pursue God's peace insofar as it might be possible, to kind of stretch out those imaginations, to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, to pray for wholeness and healing and justice among every people and place where peace seemed absolutely impossible. And for the prophets of his time, even speaking this vision, saying it out loud, was part of making it happen, part of making it true. I don't know, what do you think? Did that make any difference at all to Isaiah and his people? Do you think it makes a difference at all today? I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about, there's a children's book that's called, by David McPhail, that's simply called No. It's almost entirely a picture book, because in the book there's only one word, it's no, and it's said 3 times, and that's it. The pictures begin with this child going to post a letter that has about the golden rule that's been written to the president. And in the background, there are warplanes flying overhead with bombs, and there are armed soldiers breaking down the door of a family home. There's a tank blowing up another house. There's an old man being kind of knocked down and attacked for protesting injustice. And then when the boy gets to the post office box, there's this older boy that blocks his way, knocks the hat from his head, and the young boy says, no. And when the bigger boy says, here comes the second time, no, then the smaller boy kind of gets up in his face and firmly says, no. And the bully backs off. Those are the 3 times. And in the book, the one word kind of changes the whole story arc from oppression to celebration. So as he walks back, this boy, well, then the soldiers are giving gifts to the family, and someone is helping that elder off the ground, and the warplane isn't dropping a bomb, but a parachute with a bicycle. But what I find fascinating about this book is the response that it receives. If you go to the online reviews for this picture book, there are a lot of very strong negative reactions to this book. They're concerned that the message, it's not clear enough that it's dangerous to talk back to bullies. And, in this world, you can't just say no and expect everything's going to be fine, especially if you're vulnerable and you're the one being bullied. They're unimpressed by the fact that it is completely unrealistic, that the world's problems don't magically disappear if someone says no. So how dare this book exist? People are very angry online about this book, because clearly we should not teach children that it would ever happen this way. It is interesting to me that the idea of peace gets people so riled up. And to be fair, I never want us to give a message that we should be blaming the victim or having victims being responsible for all the world's peace. And yet, in what other way is it ever going to happen? And maybe it won't. Maybe it couldn't. That's what many people in our world are saying these days, that peace is just impossible, so give it up already. Why speak of a peace that just can't happen? Why bother when nothing's going to make a difference? Well, then again, we know that if we walk by atrocities, they're simply going to keep happening. Silence doesn't work with bullies or abusive and corrupt governments or corporations. If we're going to stop anything, we have to say so. And when we say no, forcefully, repeatedly, when we mean it, the force of that emotion has been known to turn some tides. It's the only alternative we have to despair. And even if it is completely unrealistic, doing something different is the only first step we have. In the translation we heard from Isaiah today, it begins with, "in the days to come." But a literal translation of that Hebrew would be more accurate if we could say something like, both in the days to come and right in the midst of the present. That's what Isaiah was hoping for. So this shall be our Advent invitation from now until Christmas Eve, if we dare, to hold up for ourselves a vision that might ground us in this chaotic world, to stretch our imaginations to alternative ways of being, to pray for wholeness and justice and peace and healing among every people and every place where peace seems absolutely impossible. To be challenged and equipped for something we might call God's peace. So to speak of it, to learn it, to practice it, to make peace. You never know what might happen. Perhaps, just perhaps, we might find a little bit of peace. Amen.